storm rolled in fast, a churning mass of dark clouds that swallowed the fading light of the day. Rachel and her younger brother, Tommy, had been spending the weekend at their grandparents' old farmhouse, a creaking structure that had seen better days. It stood isolated on a hill, surrounded by dense woods that whispered secrets when the wind blew. As the first raindrops fell, Rachel glanced out the window, noting how the trees danced violently in the wind. "Looks like we're in for a real storm," she said, trying to sound casual, but there was a tremor in her voice. Tommy, always drawn to the thrill of a storm, was already at the window, eyes wide with excitement. "Can we go outside?" he asked, bouncing on his toes. "No way. It's pouring out there." Rachel pulled him back from the window. "We can play a game or watch a movie instead." Tommy groaned, but before he could protest further, a sharp crack of thunder made them jump. The lights flickered, then dimmed. "Great," Rachel muttered, trying to hide her own unease. They gathered in the living room, the walls adorned with old photographs and the scent of musty wood. Rachel set up a board game on the coffee table, hoping to distract Tommy from the storm outside. But as the rain began to beat harder against the windows, a deeper unease settled in. Hours passed, and the storm worsened. The wind howled like a wounded animal, shaking the very foundation of the house. Rachel and Tommy had just finished a round of their game when suddenly, the lights went out, plunging them into darkness. "Tommy," Rachel called, feeling for her brother's hand. "Stay close. I'm scared," he whispered. Rachel squeezed his hand, searching for a flashlight in the pitch-black room. The only sound was the tempest outside, drowning out everything else. Finally, she found a flashlight and flicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. "Let's go to the kitchen," she suggested, feeling a strange pull to the heart of the house. They crept through the shadowy corridors, the beam of light flickering ominously with each crack of thunder. In the kitchen, they huddled together at the table, the storm raging outside. "What if the power doesn't come back on?" Tommy asked, his voice small. "We'll be fine," Rachel said, though she wasn't sure herself. They played another game, but it was hard to focus. The wind seemed to carry whispers, soft and taunting, weaving through the gaps in the walls. Then they heard it, a thump, followed by a soft, deliberate knock. Rachel froze, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" Tommy nodded, fear written all over his face. "It's probably just the wind," Rachel lied, but she felt the cold fingers of dread wrapping around her heart. "Let's check it out." They moved cautiously toward the front door, the knocking growing louder, more insistent. Rachel glanced through the peephole. Outside, a swirling curtain of rain obscured her vision. "I don't see anything," she said, her voice trembling. "Maybe it's a neighbor," Tommy suggested, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as her. "Let's just wait," Rachel replied, feeling a surge of protectiveness. "If it's important, they'll come back." The knocking stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. They returned to the kitchen, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Hours passed, the storm showing no signs of relenting. As fatigue settled in, they moved to the living room and curled up on the couch with blankets. Rachel must have dozed off because when she opened her eyes, the house was filled with an eerie calm. The storm had subsided to a low murmur, the wind now just a whisper. She glanced at Tommy, who was fast asleep. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the house, jolting her awake. Heart racing, she shook Tommy. "Tommy, wake up, what happened?" He mumbled, "Blurry dash, stay here." Rachel hissed, grabbing the flashlight again. She hesitated for a moment, looking back at her brother, before heading toward the sound. As she moved through the dim hall, a sense of dread coiled in her stomach. She reached the back door, the source of the noise. The door stood ajar, swinging gently on its hinges, the storm having left a mess of debris scattered across the porch. "Hello?" Rachel called, her voice quavering. No answer. She stepped outside, the flashlight beam dancing over the ground. The rain had slowed, but the night was thick with darkness, broken only by flashes of lightning in the distance. A chill ran down her spine. Something was wrong. She turned back to the house, and that's when she saw them figures standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the tree line. There were 3 of them, their shapes indistinct, but their eyes glimmered with a strange light, reflecting the faint beam of her flashlight. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She felt an instinctive pull to run back inside, to gather Tommy and lock the door. but curiosity rooted her to the spot. The figures didn't move, just stood there watching her, unmoving, silent. "Tommy," she shouted, panic rising in her voice. "Get inside." She turned to race back to the house, but as she did, a sudden rush of wind sent her stumbling. The flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. Heart pounding, she fumbled in her pocket for her phone, the dim glow providing some comfort. "Rachel," Tommy's voice called from inside. "Stay inside," she yelled, but fear had begun to wrap around her like a vine. Turning back, she realized the figures had stepped closer, their features obscured by shadows. A feeling of dread washed over her as the air grew thick, heavy with something unnameable. She sprinted toward the door, but as she reached for the handle, the figures were suddenly there, blocking her path, their faces now just a breath away. "Help us," one whispered, voice hollow and echoing. Rachel stumbled backward, her heart racing. "Get away from me." The figures remained silent, but their eyes bored into her, pleading yet menacing. "You must see," another voice murmured, and in that moment, a flash of lightning illuminated the woods. For just a heartbeat, she saw them clearly, faces twisted in sorrow, mouths stretched in silent screams. With a scream of her own, Rachel bolted inside, slamming the door shut behind her. She locked it, breathless, and turned to find Tommy staring wide-eyed, fear etched on his young face. "What's wrong?" "Who were they?" he asked, voice trembling. "I don't know," Rachel replied, shaking. "But we need to stay away from the windows." They huddled together on the couch, fear tightening around them like a vice. Outside, the storm had turned into a low growl, but the figures remained, lingering just beyond the edge of the woods, watching, waiting. Hours dragged by. The storm finally passed, but the uneasy feeling remained, an oppressive silence settling over the house. Rachel held Tommy close, whispering reassurances, but deep down, she felt the weight of something dreadful, something they couldn't escape. As dawn broke, the light streamed through the windows, but the shadows still lurked in the corners of her mind. Rachel dared to look outside, but the figures were gone, as if they had never been there. But as she surveyed the ground, her heart sank. In the mud, there were footprints, 3 sets, leading straight to the house. With a shudder, Rachel closed the door, locking it once more. She knew they weren't alone, that the watchers would always be there, lingering in the silence, waiting for the next storm to call them forth. And as the wind picked up again, a chill ran through her, a reminder that the storm might have passed, but the darkness remained. The storm rolled in quickly, dark clouds swallowing the sky as Maya pulled her old sedan into the driveway of her late grandmother's house. It had been years since she had visited, and the place was as she remembered. The peeling paint, the overgrown garden, and the creaking porch that seemed to sigh with every step. She was here to settle the estate, a task she had both dreaded and anticipated. As she gathered her things, the first drops of rain began to fall, plopping against the windshield like tiny stones. Maya took a deep breath, feeling the weight of nostalgia mixed with something darker. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her, tales of things that went bump in the night and shadows that watched from the corners of the rooms. Dismissing them as childhood fears, Maya felt a shiver of unease nonetheless. With a small suitcase in hand, she stepped out into the downpour, the rain quickly soaking her through. She dashed to the porch, fumbling with the keys before finally unlocking the door. The familiar smell of dust and mothballs hit her as she stepped inside, the air heavy with memories. The storm intensified, wind howling through the trees and rattling the windows. She made her way to the living room, where the family photos still adorned the walls, capturing moments of joy and sorrow. As she unpacked, the power flickered and finally went out, plunging the house into darkness. Maya pulled out her flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom, and set to work. Hours passed as she sorted through her grandmother's belongings, memories flooding back with each item she touched. A tattered quilt, a collection of porcelain figurines, and a box of old letters all revealed glimpses of a life once lived. But as the storm raged outside, a sense of unease grew within her. It was as if the house was alive, whispering secrets she was not meant to know. Just as she was about to take a break, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. Heart racing, Maya rushed toward the sound, flashlight beam trembling in her hand. The kitchen door stood ajar, swinging gently. She pushed it open and gasped. The window was wide open, the remnants of a shattered flower pot littering the floor. Rain poured in, soaking the table and the scattered shards of clay. Maya approached the window, trying to make sense of what had happened. The wind howled outside, and she could see the trees swaying violently in the storm. Suddenly, she felt a chill run down her spine. "Hello?" she called out, her voice barely audible over the storm. No answer came, only the sound of the rain. She scanned the kitchen, her flashlight illuminating the corners, but there was nothing there. With a deep breath, she closed the window, locking it tight against the storm. She turned to head back to the living room when she caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection of the glass, a fleeting shadow darting across the hallway. Just the wind, she told herself, though doubt gnawed at her insides. As the night deepened, Maya tried to focus on her work, but every creak of the house and every gust of wind sent her heart racing. She settled back into sorting through her grandmother's belongings, but the eerie feeling of being watched loomed over her. At one point, she heard a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails drumming against the wall. The sound was faint but persistent, pulling at her attention. It seemed to come from upstairs. Hesitant, she stood, flashlight in hand, and crept toward the staircase. Each step felt like a betrayal, a challenge to the unseen force that lurked within the house. As she ascended, the air grew colder, a damp chill that seeped into her bones. Reaching the landing, Maya paused, her heart thudding in her chest. The tapping had stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. She glanced down the hallway, where her grandmother's bedroom door stood slightly ajar. "Just checking the old house," she whispered to herself, trying to shake the unease. Pushing the door open, she stepped into the room, the beam of her flashlight sweeping across the dusty furniture. The bed was unmade, a faded quilt thrown carelessly across it. On the nightstand, a small lamp flickered uncertainly, the bulb struggling against the darkness. "Grandma," she called softly, her voice trembling. "Is anyone here?" No answer. As she turned to leave, a soft rustle caught her attention. She swung the flashlight back toward the closet. The door was slightly ajar, the darkness beyond it swirling with shadows. Maya felt an irrational urge to flee, but curiosity rooted her to the spot. What if her grandmother had left something behind? "Just a peek," she murmured, stepping closer. She reached for the closet door and pulled it open. A cloud of dust erupted, and she coughed, squinting into the darkness. The shelves were filled with old clothes, moth-eaten and forgotten. As she rummaged through them, something fell to the floor with a clatter. It was a small wooden box, intricately carved and covered in dust. Kneeling, she picked it up and brushed it off. Her heart raced as she felt an odd energy emanating from it, as if it were alive in her hands. Curiosity piqued, Maya opened the box. Inside, she found a collection of faded photographs, their edges worn and frayed. As she flipped through them, her breath caught in her throat. They were pictures of her grandmother, but they were not the sweet, smiling portraits she remembered. In these images, her grandmother appeared different, her eyes hollow and dark, a haunted look that sent a chill down Maya's spine. Suddenly, a loud clap of thunder shook the house, and the lights flickered before going out entirely. In the pitch darkness, panic surged within her. She scrambled to her feet, flashlight clutched tightly in her hand. Okay, just breathe," she whispered, trying to steady herself. But as she turned to leave, she heard it again, the soft tapping, now louder and more insistent, echoing from the hallway. Frozen, Maya felt the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. "Who's there?" she called out, voice wavering. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by an unnatural stillness. Then, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, slow and deliberate. "No," she whispered, dread coiling in her stomach. She turned, clutching the box to her chest, and bolted for the stairs. As she reached the landing, the footsteps grew louder, quickening behind her. Adrenaline surged, and she raced down the stairs, barely able to breathe. The storm raged outside, wind battering against the walls, but all she could hear were the footsteps pursuing her. She dashed into the living room and slammed the door shut, pressing her back against it, heart pounding in her chest. "Please stop," she cried out, not sure who or what she was pleading with. The house creaked ominously, the shadows stretching and twisting around her. In that moment, the box slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor and spilling its contents. The photographs scattered, and as she hurried to pick them up, one caught her eye. It was a picture of her grandmother standing beside a dark figure, its features obscured, but those eyes were unmistakable. They mirrored the hollow gaze she had seen in the other photographs. No, no, this isn't real, Maya gasped, realization dawning. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and she felt a weight pressing against it, as if something were trying to force its way in. Please, I just want to go home, she shouted, tears streaming down her face. The door shuddered under the pressure, and she knew she had to act fast. In a moment of clarity, Maya grabbed the box and its contents, scrambling to her feet. She dashed toward the kitchen, heart racing, as she threw open the back door and stumbled out into the storm. The rain soaked her instantly, but she didn't care. She ran across the yard, heading for the tree line, desperate to escape the house and whatever haunted it. As she reached the edge of the woods, she paused to catch her breath. The storm raged around her, but the air felt different, charged, electric, as if something were watching from the darkness. She turned to look back at the house, its silhouette framed by lightning. The door stood ajar, and in that brief flash of light, she saw a figure standing in the doorway, shrouded in shadow, its hollow eyes fixated on her. Maya stumbled back, fear gripping her heart. She turned and ran into the woods, branches clawing at her arms, the darkness enveloping her as she plunged deeper into the trees. The storm howled, but she pressed on, fueled by sheer terror. Behind her, the whispers rose, a cacophony of voices calling her name, pleading and demanding. Get away, she screamed, pushing herself harder, until the shadows began to fade, the storm finally quieting as she emerged onto a small path. Exhausted, soaked, and shivering, Maya collapsed on the ground. She looked back at the house one last time. The storm had passed, but the darkness lingered, a haunting reminder of what lay within. She realized then that some doors should remain closed, some shadows should never be confronted. The house stood still behind her, its secrets buried deep, waiting for the next soul brave enough to enter. As the storm raged outside, Anna found herself waiting at a remote train station, the flickering fluorescent lights barely illuminating the deserted platform. The rain hammered down, and the wind howled, turning the night into a cacophony of sound. She had missed her last bus and was now waiting for the last train of the night. The station was eerily quiet, save for the distant rumble of thunder. Anna glanced at her watch. 11:45 p.m. The train was supposed to arrive in 15 minutes, but with the storm, she felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She pulled her coat tighter, feeling the chill seep through. Suddenly, she noticed a figure standing at the far end of the platform, partially obscured by the shadows. It was a man, drenched but motionless, staring out into the storm. His presence sent an unsettling shiver down her spine, but the isolation of the station made her reluctant to leave the safety of the lights. Is everything okay? She called out, trying to sound casual. The man turned slowly, and as the light caught his face, she saw that his expression was vacant, almost hollow. He didn't respond, only continued to stare. With a nervous glance at the approaching storm, Anna took a step back, feeling the urge to flee. Just then, the station's loudspeaker crackled to life, announcing that the train was delayed. The news sent a wave of dread over her. Why is he still here? She thought. The man's presence felt increasingly threatening, his stillness contrasting sharply with the chaos of the storm. Anna considered her options. The nearest town was several miles away, too far to walk in this weather. She looked at the man again, his eyes unblinking, as if he were waiting for something or someone. The wind howled louder, and the rain began to seep under the roof, hitting her face with icy droplets. Desperate to distract herself, she pulled out her phone, but there was no signal. Anxiety crept in as she felt trapped in this isolated space with the stranger. Maybe he's just waiting for the train too, she told herself, but her gut told her otherwise. She shifted her weight, glancing at the schedule. The next train was still listed as arriving, but doubt gnawed at her. Then the lights flickered again, and Anna's heart raced as the man took a step forward, breaking the silence. They don't want you to leave, he said, his voice low and raspy. What do you mean? She replied, her voice shaking. Not everyone makes it out, he whispered, his eyes glinting with something unfathomable. The storm, it changes things. A deep rumble of thunder shook the platform, and she felt a primal urge to run. The man took another step closer, and Anna backed away, her mind racing. Just then, The sound of a train whistle echoed through the night, distant but unmistakable. "Stay away from the tracks," the man shouted, his voice rising above the storm. "You can't trust it." Panic surged in her chest. The lights flickered again, and Anna sprinted toward the far end of the platform, where the train would arrive. She heard the distant roar of the train growing louder, drowning out her thoughts. As she reached the edge of the platform, she turned back to see the man standing still, rain pouring over him like a curtain. He pointed toward the tracks, his eyes wide with fear. "Don't get on, you'll regret it." The train finally rolled into the station, its lights cutting through the dark like a beacon. The doors opened with a hiss, and Anna hesitated, torn between the warning of the man and the desperate need to escape the storm. With one last glance back at the stranger, she made her choice. She stepped inside the train, the warmth enveloping her like a hug. As the doors slid shut, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The train lurched forward, pulling away from the platform. Through the window, she saw the man standing there, his face a mask of despair, fading into the distance as the storm swallowed him whole. As the train picked up speed, Anna felt a sense of safety, but the man's words echoed in her mind. What had he meant? She looked around the empty carriage, the air thick with tension, and suddenly realized something was wrong. No one else was on the train. The seats were empty, the lights dimmed, and the landscape outside blurred into a dark void. She felt the weight of something unseen pressing in, an oppressive silence that hinted at the storm still raging outside. As the train chugged along, Anna's unease deepened. Then the lights flickered, plunging her into darkness for a heartbeat before they returned, casting eerie shadows across the aisle. She pressed the emergency button, but nothing happened. Panic set in as she realized she was truly alone. Then, she heard a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the ceiling. Her heart raced, and she glanced up, eyes wide. The tapping grew louder, accompanied by whispers that seemed to echo from the very walls of the train. "They don't want you to leave." With a scream, Anna lunged for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The train continued its relentless journey, the storm howling outside, and she realized too late she had chosen to ride the last train home, but this was a trip from which she might never return. Alright everyone, that brings us to the end of our story. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. And if you have similar stories you'd like to share with us, feel free to reach out. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.